Here we are with another security incident this week. This time it was the Egypt Air hijacking, which turned out, frankly, to be a little bit more comical than it did tragic, which of course is, we'll take that. We'll take that over tragedy every time. A couple of questions came up that I did want to address. First question is, how did the individual get through security with a fake device? Well, the question's almost self-answering to a certain extent, but really the detection equipment today is meant to detect real weapons, real bombs, certain prohibited items, and not necessarily fake things. Something that is harmless, that's allowed on an aircraft, that maybe was constructed on the aircraft to look like some sort of a device. We don't know. Maybe it didn't even come through the x-ray that way, looking that way. Maybe he wasn't wearing it at the time. So, variety of questions there. And what can be done to prevent somebody coming on with a fake device in the future? Really not much. There might be some advanced intelligence that you might get that somebody's attempting to do something like that. Possibly you might see some suspicious behaviors from the individual as they approach the screening checkpoint, or as they go through the screening process. So there might be some indicators there, but in all reality, this is one of the oldest types of hijackings that the industry has. The bluff hijacking, or the lie. Those have been going back as far as the late 60s and early 70s. Particularly after we started screening passengers, it was more difficult to get the weapons or bombs onto a plane because the technology at the time was able to detect the right things. And frankly, the bad guys had not yet evolved enough to bring other things on that the equipment could not detect. So there were people that would literally just stand up and lie and say they had a device, and they hijack the aircraft that way. And it really comes down to, it's almost like a bomb threat. Do you take them seriously? Not to take them seriously could result in tragedy. Taking them seriously, obviously, is going to cause a lot of inconvenience for passengers. And if you allow that to happen enough times, then you really start to impact the system in a significant way. So what we saw with the Egypt Air hijacking, not necessarily a security failure, the failure to detect somebody that is bringing nothing through the checkpoint, but then later bluffs and says that they have something and puts something together that looks like a bomb. That's really not necessarily a security failure. So based on what we know now, always let me qualify that, because all of this is made on the information we have at the time. Let's address a couple other things with this. Pilot jumping out the window. Some people are questioning why the pilot was doing that. He's the pilot in command. Shouldn't he stay there and try and manage the situation? Early on, that was the case. If you go all the way back to the early 70s, the pilot in command was given certain authorities, even to tell the law enforcement team when it was okay to storm the aircraft. That's all long since gone away. And what's occurred now is really the pilot is seen as just another hostage. We don't know if that person is under duress or not. We don't know if the hijacker is standing next to him or not. So to a certain extent, we have to treat the information from that individual with a little bit of uncertainty. Why did the pilot go out the window? They're supposed to. Something that has been a security procedure for a long time is once that aircraft's on the ground, or even if it's taken over on the ground, the pilot will attempt to disable the plane to prevent it from taking off. We saw on 9/11 how important that is to prevent a hijacked aircraft from taking off, and if once it is in the air, to get it on the ground safely, where you can then try and manage the incident. So when the pilot leaves the flight deck, and hopefully the first officer can get out too, that disables the plane to an extent. To the extent that you now need a hijacker or someone on board that knows how to fly the plane. There can always be the assertion that, well, the hijackers on 9/11 knew how to fly the plane. Yes. extraordinarily rare that a hijacker will have that capability. Obviously not out of the question, but the opportunity for a hijacker to be able to go up to the front of the cockpit, start the aircraft, taxi out into position, and take off. There are other methods in place that the airport will take to prevent that from occurring. So ideally, in a hijack situation, let's speak to you for a moment with what should you do if you're in this situation. First, if the aircraft's on the ground, your number one role is get off the plane, any way that you can, because now you've reduced yourself from being a hostage to somebody who's now escaping. Of course, you're going to have to make those decisions on your personal safety if you think you can get away. People you might be traveling with, there's some other things to consider, of course. Don't make yourself a target. Don't bring attention to yourself. There's just a couple of things to keep you safe during that type of a situation. I guess afterwards now, if you find out it's fake, it's okay to take a selfie with a hijacker. Wouldn't recommend that, frankly. Let's address a couple of other things too. The question of kind of how can we prevent this from happening in the future? Realistically, there's not a prevention for this. Once people stop saying stupid things on airplanes, then that prevents these types of things from happening. You have to mitigate it with what you have at the time. There's really not a technology in place today that's going to prevent that. Now let me address one final very important thing. After 9/11, we re-engineered our entire security infrastructure. And disturbingly, periodically, I will hear from Homeland Security officials or others who say that we really aren't going to worry about hijackings anymore because passengers are going to rise up and they're not going to let anybody take over that plane. Really? Think about this at this point. Nobody rose up to take out this hijacker. In fact, from what we know so far, nobody knew the plane was hijacked except the pilots and probably some flight crew, flight attendants, until the plane was diverted to the wrong location. I mean, they all probably started wondering right away why they were flying over the Mediterranean for what basically was a local flight. The assumption people make is that the next hijacking will look like the last hijacking, box cutters and knives. And the passengers will rise up and fight the hijackers. The pilots will fight back. And frankly, I hope that's true. Frankly, I hope that resistance occurs. And I hope that's all you're fighting, is a bunch of folks with box cutters. We don't have to go into the future to predict this. We can go to the past. What if the next hijacking does not look like the last one? In September 9th, or on September 9th, 2009, an individual hijacked an aircraft down in Mexico. Nobody rushed him. Nobody, unfortunately, said, let's roll and let's take this guy out. He was able to force the aircraft to land. Fortunately, nobody injured in that incident. But that really showed the reliance on the passengers being a layer of security. Everybody's going to do what you individually think you can do in that situation. You hope you will respond in the way that frankly, you're going to tell others you're going to respond if something happens. Let's go back to history for a minute. What about insiders bringing on automatic weapons, concealing them on an aircraft? Hijackers coming through security, clean, nothing on them. The aircraft goes to altitude. The hijackers retrieve the weapons. Now passengers are facing hijackers with automatic weapons and hand grenades. Is it time to assault the hijackers now? It's going to be a different dynamic. Maybe it's time to really hope there's some air marshals on board, or hope the pilots can properly defend the flight deck. I'm not making this scenario up, and I'm not giving ideas to bad guys. All you have to do is look at TWA 847, which was hijacked in 1985. That incident and other similar hijackings around that time, that's what was occurring. Insiders were bringing guns and bombs onto aircraft for hijackers to come onto the plane and take over the flight. That was the method of bypassing security. So if there's any lesson here from the Egypt Air hijacking, I think it's really a couple critical ones. One, let's not assume we're done with hijackings. Let's not assume this all goes away simply because we put a bunch of security infrastructure in place. And simply because we take a look backwards at the last hijacking and somehow assume that's going to be what the next one looks like. Let's keep our focus on that. The other thing this brings up is, it's on the national conversation right now, is the insider threat. We need to continue to look at methods to reduce the risks from insiders, airport, airline, or other employees that work at airports or with airlines, from being able to somehow facilitate some sort of attack, provide intelligence to others about weaknesses in the system, or obviously carry out the attack themselves. So that's where we're at with the Egypt Air hijack update, and also a little bit of insider threat information for you.